And you hate New York City, so the whole movie is just a wash for you.
That is true as well. That is
I have every right to hate New York City because I fucking live here. I like your city a lot more. Do you want to swap?
I actually would. I love New York.
Hello and welcome to No Pundit Intended. And this is a full house. Exciting lineup. This is really the best international feature category right here on this show. So I am Virat Nehru. I'm from Australia, and I'm joined by my partner in pun crime, Ronald Meyer from the US. And we have two very special guests. We have Thomas Gladstone from Oscar Buzz and the I guess Oscar encyclopedia when we come to any kind of knowledge. Cody Dericks, how are we doing, guys?
Doing well. Thanks for that lovely intro. The bribe is in your Venmo. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what
excited to be back on. Well, this is the first time I'm on the channel, I suppose. But yes, no, excited to talk. Always excited to talk about Oscars. So let's get into it.
What we're going to do today is just go around, give a few big picture takeaways from this season, sort of think about what we can put into the history book so that in the future we can make wiser predictions. And we're also going to offer one bold prediction for next award season.
Okay, yeah. So this year I feel like we all did pretty well with our predictions for the most part. There weren't a ton of surprises. The thing I knew was going to come true, which was that four films were just going to dominate, which was Poor Things, Killers, Oppenheimer, and Barbie. Barbie maybe a little bit less so than we thought it would. Don't tell Twitter. But overall, my other impression is that as they kept stressing in the introduction to the nomination announcements, the Academy is really more international than ever. I feel like we say that every single year, and it just keeps being further and further proven true. This year, there were things like the documentary category being made up of entirely non-American films, Anatomy of a Fall and Zone of Interest both getting 5 nominations, including, they both got screenplay, picture, and director. And I just think it's really wise in the future to not underestimate international appeal when it comes to the Oscars, which has been true in director for a few years now. We always talk about there's like the international slot. And this year that proved to be like threefold because you can even count Yorgos Lanthimos if you want, even though that film is in English, but I digress. But overall, yeah, it's just it's a United Nations like nominations we have here.
Cody and I actually met on the standby line for Hitman at Sundance, and he kind of wowed me. This was actually the day before the nominations announcement, and he ballsily told me that he thought Justine Triet and Jonathan Glazer were both getting into director. I told him he was crazy, and 12 hours or so later, I was texting him from the airport going, holy shit, please share your formula for figuring this out. Because, Woody, to your point, we sort of perceive that there's just this one international slot.
And, as I'm thinking about it, we've seen evidence in the past few years that it's even more than just one slot every now and then, because the last time Yorgos Lanthimos was nominated in 2018, there was also the nomination for Alfonso Cuarón for Roma and the surprise nomination for Paweł Pawlikowski for Cold War. So this year for me, I was kind of just looking at the landscape, and I didn't get a perfect score in Best Director. I had Alexander Payne in instead of Yorgos because I panicked at the last minute and just started switching things around, mostly because I feel like everybody's nominations were so similar, and I was just kind of thinking, there's no way we're missing something, so let me just get ahead of this. And a lot of the things I switched to end up being incorrect. So every year I do this where I panic last minute. I need to focus myself and learn not to do that. I had Yorgos in for the longest time, and then I had voices in my head saying Poor Things is faltering for whatever reason.
By the way, is one sort of trend, not that this was ever really a serious statistic, but the pattern of Alexander Payne always getting into director when his film is in picture, that is no longer the case.
Yeah,
Minor.
that's why I was
Yeah.
thinking, and I think the difference is, the last time he was nominated was Nebraska 10 years ago. And so I think the difference is that in those 10 years, we've seen a strong reshuffling of the membership, especially director, that isn't as interested in necessarily the like homegrown talent that usually gets in a lot. They're more willing to go for names that are unknown in Hollywood, like Justine Triet or oh shoot, who directed Another Round? The director of Another
Thomas
Round,
Vinterberg.
whose name escapes me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who was not a well-known, super well-known name in Hollywood at the time. Ruben Östlund last year. So I was looking at the nominations or the nomination field, and you have to line up with Best Picture, and we all had the same 10 for Best Picture, which turned out to be correct. So I kind of
I had
thought
the color
Justine Triet.
instead of anatomy.
Yes, you did, and I was trying to persuade you away from that, but
Yeah, I just refused to believe that Anatomy of a Fall was going to be as big as it turned out.
That's also because
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
both of us kind of hate Anatomy of a Fall, so our personal biases kind of seep through it.
I don't hate Anatomy of a Fall.
and you
I
love The
think
Color Purple.
No, but I think The Color Purple is very underrated, and I think Anatomy of a Fall is as overrated.
Coach, speak of I hate
Okay,
this film, and I kind of low-key love this film.
You mentioned that technically in 2018 with Pavel Pawlikowski and Alfonso Cuarón, that you could say like we've seen signs of this larger international appeal in the past. I guess it was just always hard for me to think of Cuarón and Lanthimos by that point was already well known, and he made I don't consider The Favorite to really be an international picture, even though he's a Greek director. And it was always very hard for me to think of Alfonso Cuarón as being the international pick, because the guy who directed Gravity and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, a previous winner. So I guess it was just always difficult for me to kind of categorize that as an international nominee, because they're a very well-known entity in Hollywood, as opposed to someone like Pavel Pawlikowski or Thomas Vinterberg or Ryusuke Hamaguchi. Like, these were really out of the box picks.
Yeah, and I would also say
especially because
about-
Cuarón was not a surprise. We all were expecting that, and we knew he was going to win the Oscar at that point. So it didn't register as something different or unexpected.
Well, even a year ago, we were expecting Edvard Berger to get in for All Quiet on the Western Front, but I still think I would categorize him with your Pawlikowskis, Vinterbergs, Hamaguchis.
Because you're also looking at BAFTA nominations when it comes to these director picks, because BAFTA use the jury, so it can often, get these sort of international features and the sort of more passion picks. But interestingly, Östlund didn't get the BAFTA. He wasn't part of that sort of crowd where Hamaguchi got the BAFTA and then got the Oscar. Vinterberg got the BAFTA and then got the Oscar. Östlund wasn't part of that. Östlund is sort of his own thing. Like, I was looking back at the previous nominations and sort of precursors, and how like DJ BAFTA is usually a good combo. Obviously, that didn't pay out with Alexander Payne this year. But Östlund was like really out of the blue and out of nowhere. So I think he's almost sort of an anomaly when it comes to this conversation about these international sort of auteur directors getting in. But yeah, I do agree that there is another thing that's great about this year is it proves that it can happen twice. It can happen with two directors. It's not just like this one thing from Cannes can get in, etc. Two did this year, and I think they're both very worthy, and I think that can happen again in future, as you say, as the Academy is getting more and more international every year. Like we can see films like Anatomy of a Fall that don't get international attention because obviously France didn't submit it, still do very, very well at the Oscars. And I would even argue Anatomy is probably a top 5 contender at this point, just looking at the nominations it received, the nomination that it could win. I think that is another thing to mention, that a lot more international films are in the conversation, and I think that will just only increase next year and in years beyond.
For sure.
That would have been fascinating, by the way, had France actually submitted Anatomy of a Fall.
Yeah, to have
Both
two
in
go
that,
head to head. Mm.
yeah, because we're always able to sort of look at the international feature lineup and say, oh, well, this is the one movie that crossed over to Best Picture, therefore it will win. But it would have been really interesting to see that with two films.
Yeah, now he's been cleaning up
It won.
international awards at like every other precursor,
Even where it's
even up
being
against
zone
Zone.
of interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit. It plays a little bit more audience friendly. You know, I think Zone of Interest is a masterpiece, but it's definitely more of a kind of experiment. It's not experimental, but the difference there is that Anatomy of a Fall is very friendly to audiences. Again, there's wide appeal there. It's a little bit less. I don't want to say off-putting because Zone of Interest is intentionally off-putting, but it's less trying to do something wildly different than we've seen before. The like Zone of Interest is.
You don't need to give your grandmother a disclaimer before sitting her down in front of Anatomy.
No. No.
Right. Neon isn't struggling to market it like A24 with Zone of Interest. But just looking at the best director lineup, I was kind of like, well, to be crass about it, I do think they're gonna the directors branch has a spotlight on them when it comes to their male dominant field. That's been the case for almost 100 years now. And I just kind of thought, well, I don't think they're going to go for Gerwig for Barbie. I don't think they're going to go for Celine Song for Past Lives. Justine Triet fits a lot of what they usually go for in this category anyway. She's international. She has a very European appealing film. It's going to get a Best Picture nomination. And bonus, sorry, she's a woman. I'm just thinking how the directors may have felt nominating her. So all these factors kind of made me just think, I think it's going to be Justine Triet and Jonathan Glazer, because Jonathan Glazer, a lot of us had in since Cannes. I know I did. And the way the movies just kind of like snowballed and increased to the point where a Best Picture nomination felt inevitable made that feel even more likely. So I really had no doubt about him getting in. I think he was like my number 3 most likely by the time nominations were announced.
No, I definitely agree with that. And that's honestly why I didn't put Trey in, because I did only think they were going to do one. I only thought there was space for one, especially with a stacked field. You know, Cooper even got the BAFTA. I thought Cooper was done after he missed EJ, got the BAFTA. He was definitely in with a shout, honestly. But so that's why I went with Greta Gerwig in the end. And to just springboard off of that point, I do think that is another thing we should note, that big blockbustery type picks don't happen in director. Like Denis Villeneuve didn't happen. And I think we should have looked at that and thought, well, Greta Gerwig probably won't come along then with Barbie. I think people were just a bit, you know, as I was, you know, I thought that Barbie was going to do better than it did at the Oscars. I thought Robbie was getting in. And that just didn't happen. The Barbie love wasn't there to the same extent we thought. So direct didn't come along with it. But equally, even if Robbie did get in, would Gerwig have happened? Probably not, honestly. Probably not. I think she was even below Alexander Payne in terms of getting in on. So if you're a big blockbuster studio type pick, chances are you're getting in director. I'm not convinced they're that high, especially the director's branch, they seem to like to go for these slightly smaller picks, these slightly more passion-driven picks like Zone of Interest and Anatomy.
Unless you're Christopher Nolan.
Unless you're Nolan, that is true. But equally, I think Oppenheimer is a slightly different case. I think Oppenheimer is a slightly different case this year in terms of just its power, and it's just going to dominate everywhere, that film. So
I guess I'm still thinking of the Denis Villeneuve snub as another example of directors not making it in for a part 1 when a sequel is promised in the near future. So I guess to me, I think Villeneuve can still, you know, may get in for Dune Part 2, may win, or I don't know, if Dune Messiah comes out, perhaps they'll award him for you know, the entire trilogy. I would think the better comp for Gerwig missing is maybe Joseph Kosinski, even though she was more widely predicted than Kosinski ever was. But I guess I still do think Villeneuve will get in and be more of a Peter Jackson than, you know, a Kosinski Gerwig. Now, I know faith in Dune Part 2 has kind of been lagging maybe because of its release date, but that's just also the kind of movie that may not be so vulnerable to a release date outside of that prime real estate in the fall.
Yeah. I mean, we're about to see our third Best Picture winner in a row for a film that came out before summer was over, because Coda was an August release, Everything Everywhere was March, and then Oppenheimer's July. So, we're talking way in advance here, but I don't know if the calendar matters as much anymore, at least not in terms of like really later year releases.
I think the early release date helped Everything Everywhere because that allowed the movie to gain traction. It allowed some of its detractors to rewatch it and maybe see things they had initially missed. Like, I think that's a movie that in a lot of voters' minds benefited from time, from being able to sit. Whereas something like Air, people were trying to make that comparison, like, well, maybe Air can get in because look at Everything Everywhere and when that came out. But Air is not the kind of movie that one really needs. I love Air, but I would never describe it as the kind of movie that you need to like sit with and absorb. So
No.
yeah, I mean, like I guess the calendar matters depending on what kind of movie you are.
Yeah, so there's a couple of nominations that I felt were weird and that I'd like to point to as a sign that precursors don't necessarily matter as much as we think. So one of them is Napoleon in production design. It missed the BAFTA. BAFTA loved Napoleon. BAFTA really went out for it, but it missed the production design. And honestly, if it got the production design, I would have put it in my lineup because I would have thought, yeah, like it makes sense. Napoleon, big sets, big action, all of these kind of stuff. It makes sense as a production design nominee because it missed the BAFTA. I didn't put it in, but that proved wrong. And honestly, it was just on the film. The film makes sense in production design. The film got into production design. Another one like that is The Holdovers, which missed almost everywhere when editing. It didn't do very well with editing precursors, but looking at the film, it's a big Best Picture contender. It's a comedy. It's got a lot of back and forth editing, that kind of thing. It makes sense as an editing nominee. Didn't get the precursor, didn't put it in. Again, maybe that's something to think about in future, whereas a film just makes sense in a category. Sometimes the Oscars will just go for it. And then the final one that's a bit like that is John Williams in score. I'm sure you, like everyone, were very annoyed at John Williams's inclusion in this category.
But I knew you were annoyed because I watched.
Yeah, there were so many
video with
better
Trevor and Sam.
Yeah,
and you were not. Yeah. You were not happy.
I was not happy to see Indiana Jones get any nominations last year, but alas, it did pick up that nomination. But again, John Williams didn't do great. Big name, big score. It kind of just made sense without the precursors aside. So that's one big takeaway. I'd like to say that precursors matter, obviously. They build momentum, these kind of things critically, they're there to sort of limit the field. And then the televised ones in the guilds, they're there to sort of hint us in the right direction. But at the end of the day, the Oscars are their own separate entity. The Academy have a lot of members that aren't in the other groups and will just go for their own things. So I think oftentimes we treat it as this complex web of, well, if this gets this nomination, this has to get this one, where I think those nominations I just listed showed that that's not always the case. And sometimes if it makes sense, it makes sense and you should put it in. Another thing, and this is the fairly obvious one, I feel it's not, not very subtle, but trust SAG. I feel like I didn't trust SAG enough this year. I thought they were going to snub Coleman. I thought they were going to do something a bit weirder there. I didn't think Annette Bening would carry over. And I did end up putting Jodie Foster in, but it was reluctantly. I didn't know if she'd carry over. But at the end of the day, SAG were right. And SAG have a lot of crossover. So I definitely think in future, if it gets into SAG, it's got other precursors as well. There's no real reason not to do it. And so that's another key takeaway. And then finally, there was a very weird nomination. I've been trying to rack my brain as to why. And that is Killers of the Flower Moon missing screenplay. I think that when it comes to films like Killers of the Flower Moon that are quite long, honestly, I think length does hurt you in the screenplay category. So I do think that is maybe a potential reason. Another thing is the film isn't being highlighted for its screenplay. Screenplay doesn't always have to just come along with a film just because it's a big Oscar contender. If the screenplay is not being highlighted, like I heard no one really talking about the Killers of the Flower Moon screenplay. It was all about the performances. It was all about Lily Gladstone. It was all about Robert
heavier film than The Zone of Interest, for sure.
It is, but people weren't talking about it in the same way as I think Zone of Interest. People were specifying specific elements. I do think the screenplay of Zone of Interest does have a lot going on, especially in relation to its overall, what it's trying to do overall in terms of splitting the audio and visual aspects of the film, trying to divorce it. But do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think with Killers, and I've pointed this out, there is this 3-act structure, and the farce element of the film is something that does take you out from the tone of the rest of the film. But in terms of the screenplay, you really have to buy into how the tone changes through the film, and a lot of people are having trouble with that tonal change. And also in terms of what is the centering aspect of what kind of story Killers is actually telling. Does it have to be centered from the perspective of what the film is trying to be told as? So I think there are a lot of people who had this idea that maybe it's not being told from the right perspective. Is this the right way to tell the story? And I think, that's what was hurting the screenplay a bit.
Oh yeah, because also in that, I was speaking to Ron a while ago about why Oppenheimer didn't fall into this length discourse, and I think it is because it is a lot.
I was just gonna say that half hour is really
yeah.
killing people.
But exactly, but I think because Oppenheimer is a lot more varied in what it's doing. Like the first act is quite distinct from the second act, the building of a bomb is quite distinct from the third act with the Robert Downey Jr. stuff. Whereas I think Killers, it's got that slightly repetitive nature, and I did enjoy Killers. I think it's one of the weak ones in the picture lineup. And I don't think length is really a problem, but I think for a lot of voters, it could have been a barrier, especially when a lot of it is quite samey, a lot of it is quite just going through the motions a little bit. It lacked that wow factor, and I think if we're looking at screenplays in the future, especially heavier dramas like Killers, which may seem like tech things, which may seem like active things, which may seem like shoo-ins for director, screenplay doesn't necessarily have to come along with it, and screenplay are categories that are treated as quite separate entities in parts. Like we saw even with the original screenplay, like May December, that was a lone nomination there. So yeah, I do think screenplay categories are treated as slightly a separate entity, and we do have to treat them slightly differently than just what are the big Oscar contenders.
I slightly disagree when you say that there wasn't a lot of attention paid to the screenplay. There was a narrative around the script, mainly that it was rewritten from a more traditional sort of investigative procedural to accommodate the Osage perspective.
Do you not think that was slightly more attached to how Scorsese directed the film, though, and how he brought in these perspectives through directing?
No, because they talked about pretty much having the script done and then needing to go back and completely revamp it. It was sort of being discussed as a feat of improvisational writing. My whole thing about it, and Virat, you mentioned this, that it's sort of tonally inconsistent. I also feel that the movie has kind of a personality disorder. And recently we heard some news that might provide insight as to why. I have been kind of shy to talk about this because I don't want to be branded a conspiracy theorist, but is it possible that it missed because a lot of voters knew that Eric Roth didn't quite deserve credit for what the movie ended up being? Did more people know that Paul Thomas Anderson had ghostwritten this movie, and maybe they weren't willing to turn it into a scandal that would kind of shame the industry, but privately it's possible they weren't comfortable with giving a nomination to, I mean, Eric Roth is a legend, of course, but would they have been comfortable giving him a nomination for a film that he may have only kind of written the foundation for before it had gotten taken over by someone who, again, in hindsight, you hear the news that PTA heavily influenced the direction of the script, and there are moments in the movie that suddenly make more sense, right? Like Thomas, we were talking about the Brendan Fraser bit,
Brendan Fraser,
how that whole thing just, it's a lot clearer where that came from after you hear that Paul Thomas Anderson had such a big role in
Exactly. It felt like Bradley Cooper and Licorice Pizza. It felt like that kind of, well, okay, we're in this tone now, but it worked for Licorice Pizza because that was a lot more flowy in terms of tone, whereas this, it was like all
because
very
that was
heavy,
all
all very
PTA,
serious.
and this
Suddenly we've got
movie
Brendan
is
Fraser.
sort of wrestling
Exactly.
between perspectives. And again, like, we've had this conversation has been ongoing that Killers feels like it doesn't, either it's told from the wrong perspective or it doesn't have a perspective at all. And I guess all of that just is clarified by the news that, well, yeah, you had too many cooks in the kitchen. Does anyone want to weigh in? Tell me I'm totally wrong.
I will say, for all we know, it is still a rumor. So I'm not going to speak with any authority on it. However, I don't really think that would be taken too much into consideration by the writers branch. If anything, I could maybe even see it helping it. I mean, they nominate PTA all the time in screenwriting categories. Granted, he wouldn't get the nomination, obviously, even if he was some sort of ghostwriter or assistant or whatever. But I think the factors on the surface that are a little bit more obvious to us are more likely what costed the nomination. Granted, mostly the length and people just perhaps not liking the perspective of the film, which, personal tastes.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I definitely think that is one of the weirdest nominations. 'Cause it missed the BAFTA, but that did not prepare me at all for it missing the actual Oscar nom. I was not expecting that. That was one of the most shocking things to honestly come. Like, it was more shocking in many ways than Greta Gerwig missing. Margot Robbie missing was quite shocking, but still, it was definitely up there.
Barat, your takeaways from the 23-24 season?
Sure. I'll build on something that Cody mentioned and touched upon. I feel like the Academy cannot win because when it nominates American films, it's blamed for being too local, and when it's nominating international picks, it's blamed for not backing American films. And this is coming from, there's an article in Variety where specifically about the documentary nominations, which were all international this year, and the U.S. documentary filmmakers, they were like, well, we had American Symphony and still a Michael J. Fox documentary being the supposed frontrunners in the U.S. documentary scene, and none of them got a nomination. And they were calling for maybe there should be a separate category, which is US only documentaries to be introduced in the Academy. So I'm just feeling like maybe this diversification of the Academy, where we're kind of getting more international sort of feel and flavor. It's not just in Best Picture. It's not just in Best Director. It's actually spreading the love all across other categories. And I think it's causing a bit of a rumble. And I think other categories which were thought to be American only or American first, for want of a better word, are now feeling like they have to compete with international films a lot more, which is cause of sort of changing the tectonic shift. I won't call it an earthquake. I feel like a tectonic plate shift is happening, and people aren't too happy about how that's playing out. Whether that means that the Academy changes rules once again, I'm not sure, but I was very shocked to read the article in Variety where people thought that just because no American film was nominated in the documentary category, that there should be a separate category. That's a huge call to make and doesn't make any sense. Even though streamers picked it up and there was a lot of money thrown around, I don't feel like just because you have a certain amount of money that it should guarantee you a nomination. That's a wrong way to look at it, and it's a really bad takeaway in general. But I was really happy to see the spread of international films. So even if you look away from, Best Picture or Best Director, we have Boy and the Heron leading in the animated feature category over Spider-Verse. Something no one could have predicted, even though I'm slightly sad that Joe Hisaishi didn't get a music nod.
I kind of... Wait, is it actually
score.
On Gold Derby, is it leading? Boy and the Heron ahead of Spider-Verse?
It's going to be an interesting race. I don't think anyone really thought it was going to be as close a race as it is currently.
I thought it would. I have the receipts. I mean, I can. They're no longer online, but I still have them saved in my Google Docs. You can see the dates.
I was never one of those people who was like, "It's getting Spider-Man getting a Best Picture nomination." Like,
I was very much on the opposite. I was on the train going in the opposite direction. I was like, one, I'm not even sure it can win animated because it's a part one, And also, I don't know, I just felt like in a year where we're so kind of preoccupied with questions over AI and how that's erasing the human touch. Not that there isn't abundant human artistry on display, but that was a film made on an assembly line where you had all of these animators, right? That was kind of the like a badge of honor that I think it had like more a record number of animators involved. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that I think that was
Some
part of the
extraordinarily high
marketing
number.
campaign. Yeah, that's
And
part
I
of the marketing
thought
campaign.
like The Boy and the Heron is the product of mostly the product of one person's imagination. And that might sort of appeal in a sentimental way to voters who kind of want to reward something that feels more personal, more singular, as opposed to something that was made by all of these different hands.
Yeah, I think if it wins the BAFTA, even if Spider-Verse takes PGA, I'd probably lean Boy and the Heron, honestly, which is not where I thought this awards season was going. Just like I was, so I would admit, I was one of those people who went a bit too hard on Spider-Verse in the initial weeks after its release. I loved the film. I think the film would honestly be worthy of Best Picture. But the narrative hurt it. That's another thing to take away. The narrative behind, obviously, the harmful, toxic work environment that was created in order to create Spider-Verse, it really did seem to harm its film, and it really just removed any passion because you couldn't really talk about the fact that you like Spider-Verse anymore because there would always be that caveat of, yeah, but it was made under horrible conditions. I'd honestly be predicting Boy and the Heron at this point, really. I do think it does take BAFTA, and I think that could be enough for it to win.
Yes,
I was
I
a
really
little
hope so.
overexcited. I was overexcited by its Golden Globe win. It was just sort of a case of confirmation bias. But then the folks at Fantasy Film Ball wisely pointed out that if The Boy and the Heron was going to win anywhere, it would be with the Golden Globes. So I was just like, okay, fair enough. But it
Maybe,
still
but they
seems
were
like
the first ones to really give a big win to Spider-Verse in 2018, and that kicked off its like wins. Up till that point, everybody was all about The Incredibles 2, which in hindsight feels crazy. But before then, we were kind of like, we were like, there's no way a Spider-Man movie is gonna win an Oscar, and then the Golden Globes like gave people permission to not pick the requisite Pixar movie that year.
I guess it's just because The Boy and the Heron was there an international contender that year?
Mirai, Mirai, I believe it was called.
This is
Mirai.
what I mean. Like he can just pull this out of his head. So
yeah, ask me name
Why,
my
I didn't
cousins, and I couldn't tell you. But stuff like this, I know.
Yeah.
this stuff is more important. Who needs to remember cousin names?
100%. 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Rod,
the
do you-
only other thing would be, I mean, Boy and the Heron aside, is the other left field international nomination, Godzilla -1 for VFX, which, great film, but I don't think I was thinking about it in terms of any Oscar chances. I mean, I was just like, this is a nice monster movie. And then it gets VFX. So that's a nice thing. But I think in general, it's sort of telling me that we can look away from just Best Picture, Best Director in terms of international film seeping in, and other categories will be much more varied going forward. And that's going to cause a bit of stir and maybe a lot more articles in Variety about how American filmmakers are pissed off, which is going to be fun to read.
I have two takeaways. I'm going to just give the short and sweet one first. There is no use in looking for a crowd-pleasing alternative to a technical juggernaut when the technical juggernaut in question happens to be crowd-pleasing. Basically, I'm talking about Oppenheimer and how for the longest time, we have been, myself included, have been trying to turn it into this year's fatigue frontrunner a la Roma and The Power of the Dog. But Oppenheimer isn't Roma or The Power of the Dog. It's not a cold art house movie. It's not quote unquote inaccessible. It's massively popular. People love it. And it is very emotionally rousing. It's an old fashioned melodrama in some ways. And I think up until a couple weeks ago, I was still looking at The Holdovers or American Fiction kind of sneaking in and being this year's Green Book, or coda. But then I realized, like, we just don't need that alternative because Oppenheimer isn't dividing people the way The Power of the Dog did. It's not leaving some people cold and indifferent the way Roma did. If the technical achievement of the year is also this massive crowd pleaser, then we don't need to look for the indie darling. And as of now, I think I'm just going to predict Oppenheimer for the win.
There's no reason not to. There's no alternate. There's no reason to doubt. Everything about Oppenheimer is practically made in a factory to win Oscars. Even the fact that it was not intended as an Oscar film, that's something they like even better than something that's aiming towards like Oscar bait. It just there's no clear alternate. It is a crowd pleaser that even if it didn't make $1 billion, would probably still be a Best Picture nominee. But it made $1 billion or close to it.
Yeah.
So there's little reason to doubt it. There's no alternate, really. I just don't see a world in which this doesn't happen. Yeah, but then they missed Best Director. Like, there's like weird places here and there, and Oppenheimer has yet to miss anywhere. None of the precursors. It got every nomination it could.
You could sort of point at the absence and you could say, oh, even more reason the holdovers is the Green Book coda.
I guess I've seen people use snubs, and I use that word very cautiously, to justify a film being more likely to win awards than it is. Like, I've seen people be like, the Barbie misses mean it's like more well loved, and I'm like, no, I think the misses just mean it isn't going to win as many as you thought. I think we're overthinking it here.
Yeah. Like, I wasn't trying to argue that the holdovers now has a chance because Payne missing gives it this boost. I know that's the argument people are trying to make for Gerwig by referencing Affleck. No, I just meant like that indie alternative doesn't usually get in for director. That's what sort of makes it the alternative to like the tech achievement, right? That it's crowd pleasing. It's more of a screenplay driven film. And that's why it doesn't need to get into director.
I would just add to your point, Ron, that like part of the reason I think a lot of people try and find these workarounds to try and come up with, the indie darling that might take it is just for fun, really. I think at the end of the day,
to call the
exactly
in advance.
Exactly. Award season can get quite boring. But equally, if you think it's boring, why are you doing it in the first place? And secondly, there are plenty of other races this year that are very interesting. Best Actress will be a very close race, I feel. You've got
Best
some
Actor.
locked up categories. I think Best Actor is a very interesting race. I think Best Original Screenplay could go one of 3 ways in my mind. So that's going to be fascinating to watch unfold. Adapted Screenplay than just because Best Picture might be locked up, you don't need to try and find workarounds to try and make that the interesting category. There are already a lot of stuff to talk about and a lot of stuff to discuss, and a lot of places where people differ in their predictions. So, yeah.
Good point. My second takeaway is about Energa Camerimage. If I sound like I am stiffly reading from paper, it's because I am. But I just wanted to make sure this gets out as clearly as possible. So, Energa Camerimage is an underappreciated precursor. A year ago, the Polish Cinematography Festival included Tar and Bardo among its honorees. Bardo, which eventually got an Oscar nomination, took many by surprise when it first got in at ASC. Tar was also considered a shocking inclusion in the Oscar lineup. I personally had Tar predicted for ASC, but when it missed, I took it out of my Oscar 5. In the past, the festival has honored Dune, Joker, and Nomadland, but those were always probably getting in. They were strong contenders in the category throughout the season. But some of their picks, like Ida and Lion, were less of an obvious thing. Camerimage gave us the tip nearly a month before the New York Film Critics Circle kicked off the precursor phase of award season. This year, I correctly predicted that Ed Lachman would get in for El Conde, this year's Silver Frog winner. Bronze went to Poor Things, but again, that was heavily predicted and was probably always getting in. The Golden Frog winner, The New Boy, was just too far outside the awards conversation to be considered, and I'm not even sure that it has US distribution. But El Conde just made sense for a couple reasons. Lachman previously won for Carol, and he placed second and third for Far From Heaven and I'm Not There. Pablo Larraín is widely enough known after Jackie and Spencer to attract attention, and a black and white European art house film distributed by Netflix, no less, just seemed likely enough to be this year's out of the box pick. This exclusive cinematography-centric event's judges and attendees comprise, this is an assumption, some of the voting bodies whose behavior we spend months trying to predict. Because these people belong to actual cinematography branches, Energocom Homage is in some ways a much more reliable barometer of where tastes will land in a given year than critics groups.
Yeah,
I had El Conde in too. Just saying.
Nice. Oh, wait, I mentioned that to you before, and I don't remember you saying, hey, me too.
Yeah, I got 5 out of 5 on cinematography. I had El Conde in all season though, so
Cool.
Yeah, impressive. And very deserving nom, I will say.
Movie. When I saw the movie, I thought it made sense, and I had an eye on it. And then when it won the Silver Frog, I was just like, oh yeah, this is gonna be like my wild bet. I still didn't get 5 out of 5 with ASC because I thought the Zone of Interest was getting in. I don't remember. I think I had Oppenheimer, Killers, Poor Things,
Maestro.
Zone of Interest. Yeah, that was weird because when I did my 5, I realized I'm like, wait, I left Maestro out for some reason. And then I was just sort of struggling because I couldn't see Maestro missing. But I think I ultimately kept Zone of Interest in, and I wasn't budging on El Conde just because that was going to be like my wild card.
The New Boy was huge in Australia because Warwick Thornton, Australian film, Kate Blanchett, but I know it didn't really, do well overseas, so it didn't cross over as well. But
I mean, it hasn't even come out.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, that's part of the problem. But from that perspective, I know that award is very well respected in cinematographers here. So I'm guessing that would be the same in the US and generally in terms of what the international branch would look at in terms of looking at that award as some kind of indicative measure. So I completely agree with you. So that El Conde pick doesn't seem as crazy in hindsight. I think it's a very well positioned, well kind of thought out.
And there's enough kind of like quote unquote random nominees that we get in this category every so often. Like I'm thinking of Never Look Away in 2018. That was kind of surprising, but made sense in hindsight. Did that? Yeah, I see you looking through your book. How'd that do that year?
No, it did not.
It didn't? Okay.
An Ergotom Homage, no.
Gotcha.
I can actually, so in 2021, they did Come On, great pick. The Tragedy of Macbeth and Dune. Tragedy of Macbeth and Dune, always getting in. No,
yes.
2020, Nomadland, Helene and Pinocchio. 2019, Joker, The Two Popes, Painted Bird. 2018, The Fortress, Cold War, Roma. Cold War, I think, throughout the season Lucas Zal was doing pretty well, so I wouldn't.
Yeah, that wasn't a surprise.
In that case.
Great pick.
In 2017, they did On Body and Soul, Loveless, and First They Killed My Father. In 2016, they did Lion, which I'm pretty sure was more of a shock.
No, that was winning pretty much a lot of stuff. Like I think it won ASC even. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, but was it a surprise? I don't mean like, was it a shocking Oscar inclusion? It did win ASC, but like, was it a surprise when it got in at ASC? Was Lion widely touted by critics group?
I think people had it pegged because it was like the Weinstein movie that year, like kind of the last one, basically.
When I looked through the list of awards it got, it didn't seem like Greg Fraser was getting the lion's share of prizes.
You're set up.
He's so pleased by puns. He's just so tickled by them. And then in 2013, in 2015, Carol. 2013, Inside Llewyn Davis. Probably not like too surprising of a pick.
It seems like generally films that do well in Australia do well here because Lion, Garth Davis, Australian director, based in Australia. Then you have New Boy, obviously, Warwick Thornton, Australian director. On Body and Soul won the top prize at the Sydney Film Festival. The only place it won the top prize, by the way, in the festival circuit.
Forgot about that movie. Oof.
I know.
Okay, so
And
scratch my takeaway. The real takeaway is that we should keep an eye for movies made by Australian directors.
essentially, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
Homage.
Yeah.
Shall we go and through and do our one bold prediction for next year?
All right. So I had a few options here. I'm one of the people that has trouble thinking about too many things at once. So I have trouble thinking of a future race while we're still in the middle of one. But just looking at the prospect of what's on the horizon. Okay, I'm kind of doing this because I called my shot a few years ago and I want to continue this. So, long story short, I was at the Venice Film Festival when Dune premiered and I saw it there and I called that the film would do well at the Oscars. It would get a bunch of craft noms. It would get a Best Picture nomination, but Denis Villeneuve would not get nominated for Best Director. I have receipts. I called this in August. I didn't predict that when we got to the actual prediction, but that's a different story entirely. We're not going to talk about that right now. However, I do think that the same thing will hold true for part two. I think it's going to do very well in the craft categories. It's got visual effects and sound right walking in the door right now with a strong potential for score, cinematography, production design, all the ones it won 2 or 3 years ago. But I think the same thing's going to happen where we're not going to see Denis Villeneuve get in. I just think unless the film is, an Oppenheimer level of just a Titanic achievement, which I think the first Dune was. I really like that movie myself. But I just think he doesn't line up in terms of the film that he's directing with the previously discussed in this episode interests and perspectives of the director's branch. Again, if this is a huge Return to the King level achievement, then this will be it'll be a different story. But I am a little about the March release date. I know that was not intentional. That was because of the strikes, but I don't think it speaks to the quality of the film necessarily, but I do think it will be something that voters will have to hold on to for, practically a year before they can award it. And I know we just saw Everything Ever do this. I understand, but I'm just calling my shot. I don't think Denis getting in for part two.
I think the box office on June, and box office isn't usually the most important thing when it comes to Oscar predictions. I do think for June it will matter, though.
I do think Coleman Domingo will get another Oscar nomination and possibly win for Sing Sing. And I called this was in my predictions this year when we weren't sure when it was coming out, but I do think Samuel L. Jackson will win supporting actor for The Piano Lesson, and it'll be 2 years in a row of these MCU actors winning career achievement awards and supporting actor.
Okay, right. So I'm going to list some films: Gladiator 2, Joker Folie à Deux or 2, Furiosa, and Mickey 17. I don't think any of them will get above the line nominations. I don't think any of them will get any acting, screenplay, director, picture. I don't think any of them will actually happen. So
I agree with
that's
you.
sort of a first one. Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I just think Bong Joon-ho, I think people will look at Parasite and think, oh, Mickey 17 will be a big Oscar contender. I'm not sure. And then you've got a bunch of sequels there. Gladiator, to be honest, I think it's 10 years too late to make Gladiator. I'm looking forward to it. Paul Mescal, great. Ridley Scott, I liked most of his previous stuff. And then Furiosa and Joker, I just don't think they'll capture or recapture the magic of the first two, especially Joker. I think Joker was made in 2019, and that feels like an eternity ago. I think if Joker was released in today's environment, would it have worked to the same extent? I'm really not sure. So I think those 4 films I just listed will walk away with no above line nominations. That's Tex, maybe. We'll see. I'm not willing to go too bold there. And then the other one is, I think, Flint Strong. This is screenplay by Barry Jenkins, produced by Barry Jenkins. I think this will be in line. I think this will be in Best Picture. And it's just sort of a sports drama, but with Barry Jenkins' name attached. Brian Tyree Henry's in it. Ryan Destiny, I think, could get nominated. I could see her equally being that snub, or not snub, but sort of thing that people want to happen, passion pick that doesn't quite happen. But I'd be predicting her. So yeah, Flint Strong, I think will do really well. The other 4 films I listed, less than much.
Sorry, Thomas, I'm gonna sort of spoil your parade a little bit because I think Furiosa is gonna do really well. I think George Miller might get in for directing. Yep. And I think it's going to get in for Best Picture. Because I looked it up, and how is this George Miller's only won his only Oscar for Happy Feet? happy feet as best animated feature, which is insane. I mean, got nominated for the original Mad Max and that won other technical awards, but only nominee for director and nominee for best picture. I think that will be corrected this time around. I think we might see either. I mean, they're getting nominated for both, but I think he might win best director. I'm gonna hold out for my Aussie homeland pick. Okay. So that's my bold prediction. I mean, Rod just literally. I mean, his eyes could roll back in his socket. It could. So it's just
no. I mean, you have to be really when you tell me in February 2024, you're not too sure yet whether Nolan is winning. That's when I'm like, you've lost your mind. But you have to be pretty arrogant.
Yeah.
You have to be kind of an asshole to scoff at someone's prediction a year in advance.
Exactly.
I mean,
we've not even had this year's Oscars. So
yeah, so it's like you say George Miller might win. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that Steve McQueen can finally get a directing Oscar. He has Blitz coming out. We've talked privately about Megalopolis. I'm surprised you reserved your bold pick for George Miller and not.
No, because the thing is, I don't remember the last popular film which was relevant, and I'm not even sure if he's relevant anymore. So it could just be such a dumpster fire that even too bold for me. I'm too hesitant to say anything about it. But that's one of my most anticipated. For that reason, it could be so bad that it's so good. It's one of those films. Or it could be so good that it's so good,
My bold pick, I don't know if it's that bold. I think Robert Eggers can get a Best Director nomination for Nosferatu. I have two reasons to back myself up here. One, the early word on its technical concept seems pretty exciting, and it reminds me of James Cameron getting in for Avatar or Ang Lee winning for Life of Pi, and even this year with Christopher Nolan getting in for Oppenheimer. I think we like these narratives of a filmmaker pioneering technology. Now, I don't think making a movie with 70 millimeter or 65 millimeter IMAX in black and white is that big of a deal, because there was never any technical reason that couldn't exist. You know what I mean? It's like a cheeseburger with peanut butter and jelly. It's like, no one's done it, but it doesn't mean you can't make that request. Like, it is technically feasible. Nevertheless, I think we read those headlines and we think, oh, this person is doing something innovative. They're pushing the medium forward. Again, Ang Lee, right, did a bunch of crazy shit with 3D for Life of Pi. James Cameron, all we could sort of talk about that season were the new cameras that he devised to make Avatar possible. And this year, again, we've been talking at some length about the new film stock that Nolan and Hoyt van Hoytema partnered with Kodak to deliver. With Nosferatu, there's already been some stuff written, particularly by Jordan Rumi on World of Real, about this new filter Eggers enlisted a glass manufacturing company to design. And it allowed the movie to be shot in black and white while still emphasizing particular colors like blue and red. We're going to have some lovely featurettes coming out, I'm sure, when that movie is released about this new kind of technical approach that Eggers took. And the other reason, even though it's a vampire movie and we like to charge the Academy with exhibiting genre bias, Nosferatu is such a foundational piece of filmmaking that I don't think the horror label will really affect it. I don't believe voters will turn their noses up at it because of its deep connection to like the history of filmmaking.
I hope you're right. As a horror slut myself, I'm always saying the Academy needs to get more horror up in its lineup. So sounds good to me.
I hope you're right as well. Love The Northman. Thought he was worthy of something, at least something for that film. In The Lighthouse, one of my favorites. So yeah, like 100% Robert Eggers. Can't wait to see him get the Academy dues. Hopefully it's for this one.
And it's scheduled to come out on Christmas. I know in recent years we've kind of we no longer see that movie, right? Like Babylon didn't do well this year. Obviously, The Color Purple. I'm sure there are a couple of other examples, but we're sort of for a couple of seasons seeing that, oh, maybe like if you come out on Christmas, your chances aren't what they used to be. Like it's like, Vice did very well. 1917 is another one. But yeah, I guess because Babylon underperformed and The Color Purple so severely underperformed that we're kind of losing faith in that. I don't know. Maybe Nosferatu, if it sticks to that release date, can revive that trend. Before we sign off, have we seen a trend broken? One minor thing. I think for a while it was observed that anytime an A24 movie gets into Best Picture, a directing nom usually accompanies. That always seemed like something that was eventually going to be broken, and this year it finally was because Past Lives got into picture, but Celine's Song did not make it into director. What do you guys think? Any trends, patterns that have reasserted themselves, emerged, or been disproven?
Nothing surprising, but the TIFF Audience Award still is like you gotta win it if you're looking. You gotta look to that winner for a Best Picture nominee, because like I don't think we'd even really heard of American Fiction until it premiered and won that award there.
Yeah, like
for sure.
It's not just giving a movie a boost anymore. It is just entirely putting it into a conversation it was never a part of. Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, like, had The Holdovers won TIFF People's Choice, it'd be like, oh, nice, a movie that was probably getting nominated, now given that nice bonus. But yeah, American Fiction was just totally outside the conversation, and that win alone made it a contender. And yeah, I mean, it's for a while I convinced myself it could be this year's Coda or Green Book. It definitely
right now it's my number 2 or 3 for Best Picture. Not that it really matters what is not Oppenheimer in that running, but it's up there for me for that reasoning.
Yeah, I think I said in like October time that I had it winning Best Picture, and I kind of wish it does gone so I could say that, but no, I think it is Oppenheimer. I think it is Oppenheimer all the way. But yeah, I'd like to see Holdovers, make a bit of a run for it.
Yeah, I know you're a big Holdovers fan.
For sure.
Cody, how do you feel about the Holdovers?
It's fine.
Yes,
perfectly fine. I haven't thought about it much since I saw it like 4 months ago.
And okay, so 3 people are kind of indifferent toward the Holdovers. One person,
one person loves it. Yeah.
2 people strongly dislike Anatomy of a Fall. Well, I don't strongly dislike it. Thomas, you love it. Cody, what says you?
That's it.
It's same answer to the Holdovers. I think they're like right in the middle lower of the Best Picture 10 for me. Like the top tier for me is like Oppenheimer, Zone, Past Lives, like easy. And then it's like Poor Things, Barbie Killers. And then it's like everything else, and then Maestro.
Rod hates Past Lives, so you just gave me ammunition.
I don't hate Past Lives. However, I like Past Lives less than Anatomy of a Fall. I think Past Lives is
and you don't like Anatomy of a Fall that much. So
it is such a shallow movie where characters, instead of actually exhibiting this connection by talking about the things they have in common. There's this line where John Magaro says to Greta Lee, what if you had met someone else with the same taste in books and movies? Would you have ended up with that person? And I so desperately just wanted to hear these characters talk about the books and movies they like, talk about something that hints at some kind of personality. But instead, over and over again, we just heard them talking about this rare metaphysical connection. And it's like, stop telling me you have this connection and actually give me a reason to buy into it. I don't know. I think that's why the movie doesn't deserve to be compared to the Before trilogy, because in the Before trilogy, we sense this connection based on the things that they're talking about, their politics, their
this up for this section.
Philosophical leanings.
And you hate New York
actually
City,
get-
so the whole movie is just a wash for you.
That is true as well.
I have every right to hate New York City because I can live here. I like your city a lot more. Do you want to swap?
I actually would. I love New York.
Okay.
And that brings us to the end of the episode. It's been fun. Thank you so much, Cody. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us from opposite ends of the world. Bye, and we'll see you in the next episode.